The Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted by Newell Fisher, Ruths and Leea Mäkelä, and is narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. It includes adapted text from John, who I'm very grateful to for helping me with the script during a difficult week. It's really good for him to be involved in the last episode dealing with the writing of Richard Adams. Many thanks also to Erik Steps for his research work on the Watership Down video game. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 117, in which we will be looking at the 8th story from part 3 of Tales from Watership Down, chapter 19 of the overall book, and the last chapter, Campion. First, though, a few things to mention. The new audiobook of Tales from Watership Down is due out in June 2023. That's next month at the time of recording. It is narrated by Simon Vance, and the cover illustration, excitingly, is by Joe Sutvin, who has illustrated the upcoming graphic novel of Watership Down. I will definitely be buying this new audiobook version, for which there will be a link in the notes. Next, a reminder about our Just Giving appeal to raise funds for the Rabbit Welfare Association and Fund, and many thanks to Amber Belden for your very generous donation. Welcome to the Owsler for services to the assistance of hutch rabbits. I also forgot to welcome Kirsty Yates to the Owsler 3 weeks ago after she made the first donation via the initial Facebook appeal. The link to the appeal will also be in the notes for this episode. Please give whatever you can. Next, I'd like to say a few things about part 3 of the Watership Down video game footage that Erik Steps posted on YouTube. Again, the link to this will be in the notes. This was the last of these video games and covers the liberation of the hutch rabbits at Nuthanger Farm. Unfortunately, this means that the whole Efratha section of the original story is not covered, as the production of these games stopped after this. Erik speculates on the reasons in his commentary. Basically, these games seem to have not been much of a success at the time. As the game begins, Hazel points out to his fellow rabbits that they only have one doe, Blackberry, and that they need more. Yes, remember that Blackberry is a doe in the TV series. She also seems to be a bit put out at not being considered sufficient. And so Hazel, Fiver and Pipkin make their way straight to the farm. This roughly reflects episode 6 of series 1 in the TV series, although the dog at the farm does not look the same as the one in the TV series, and the farm is not named as Nuthanger. This dog is more of a hound, as opposed to the black Labrador of the book, and the more Doberman-looking dog of the TV series. The first action the rabbits can take once there is to collect a bone. This is used later in the game to help deal with the dog. Then, in the first game, Hannah the mouse has to navigate a maze of potential noise-making objects, all seemingly the dog's toys, in order to get through the farmyard without waking the dog. It took Erik a while to find out what exactly Hannah was supposed to be aiming for. Eventually, however, having woken the dog several times, she got to a door that leads into the storeroom. Somehow, Hannah getting there allows Hazel, Fiver and Pipkin to as well. Hazel then has to climb some rotten shelves to reach the hutches, avoiding the rotten sections, while also having to dodge nuts being thrown by a jealous buck hutch rabbit. Why nuts? Why not bits of carrot? This is a good old-fashioned platform game along the lines of Super Mario and looked quite difficult. Having reached the hutches, Hazel finds 3 friendly does in one hutch, with the nut-throwing buck conveniently confined to another. He tells Hazel he is lucky he is locked in the hutch. This angry hutch buck is a change from the book and the 1978 film, in the latter of which we merely hear a buck saying in passing that he is happy where he is, while in episode 6 of the TV series there is one indifferent lop-eared buck who gets back in the hutch at the first sign of a cat. Here Hazel has a dialogue choice in order to persuade the 3 does to come with him. The correct option turns out to be the one that admits there is danger in the wild, just not too much. Hazel then has to think of a riposte to the hutchbuck's comment that Hazel looks so thin that there can't be much food in the wild. Again, the balanced option of saying that there is perfectly adequate food but not in abundance, while not insulting the hutchbuck, is the right option. Oddly, Hazel then says they stockpile food for winter, which rabbits simply do not do, unless in the form of body fat. To further convince them to come along, he speaks of the honeycomb, the option that does not oversell it or insult the hutched rabbits again being the right one. Having persuaded the does to come along, he must now find the combination to the lock on their cage. Yes, I know. The padlock turns out to be rusty with correct numbers stuck together, so it is easier than it might have been for a rabbit. I'm sure they could have come up with a game based on chewing instead. Clover leaves the hutch willingly, but Hazel still wants to persuade the other 2. We now cut to Watership Down, where Bigwig is telling Keehaw and Hannah that they must leave to make room for the new does. Blackberry disagrees. Annoyingly, this is settled between Bigwig and Blackberry by another game of bobstones. This may indicate that the game developers were running out of ideas. Thankfully, Erik got through this one quite quickly. Keehaw, having been allowed to stay, flies off to see what is happening at the farm. Back at the farm, Hazel fails to persuade the other two does to come along. Leaving the barn, he wakes up the dog, whose barking alerts the farmer. So now to the next game, the escape from the farmyard. In this child-friendly game, the farmer is armed only with a net, with which he will add Hazel to his hutch collection. It is a straightforward escape to the correct hiding place, with a very quick farmer ready to net Hazel with any hesitation. Outside the farm, having fed a hungry Pipkin with a radish Clover kept as a souvenir, both he and Clover leave for Watership Down. Fiver in the last game must now search for Hazel in the dark by avoiding sounds of danger as he navigates the field. Hazel found, he uses the bone he collected earlier to distract the dog. Hannah and Keehaw are now present, and they all set off for Watership Down. The third game closes with a nighttime ensemble on the Down. And that is the end of Game 3, and of the series of video games. You can really see why it did not go any further, but it was an interesting different angle on Watership Down. For me, personally, the most canon element of the three games was the playable game of bobstones, which, while not the most entertaining game ever thought of, does work as a game of chance that can be played as if it is more than that. Thank you once again, Erik, for all your hard work on this. It has been a real trip down memory lane to video games of a certain vintage, with the added bonus of a Watership Down theme. So then, on to the final chapter from Tales from Watership Down. Part 3, Story 8, Chapter 19, Campion. You might not be surprised to hear that I like this chapter a lot, for it is the last Richard Adams ever wrote set in his much-loved world of Watership Down, and those writings go out on a very high note. It is a chapter with a fair bit of exposition, which it can be forgiven for, and its focus on Campion very much leaves that universe on a tone of reconciliation and looking forward, while not trying to ignore the past or its more awkward aspects. The opening quotation is from Shakespeare's Henry V. In it, King Henry, himself born in Wales, praises the brave Captain Llewellyn, who, though fighting as part of the English army in France, is nevertheless portrayed as a cliched Welshman in the play, with the FL at the start of his name reflecting the inability of the English to pronounce the Welsh double L sound, a problem we still have 400 years later. There is an awkward side to this praise, which is appropriate to this chapter, as at that point in British history Wales had been completely conquered by the English and was part of the Kingdom of England. And yet, brave Captain Llewellyn, as he should be called, of the English army, fighting for that army in France, is still treated as the other, as is Campion, arguably at the start of this chapter. The chapter opens at Groundsell's warren after the battle with the weasels. The weather stays fine, and good progress is made with the warren, which comes to be known as Vlef Lane. This warren should form quickly, given the number of pregnant does who are digging the burrows, while the bucks focus on the long runs that link them. Information is coming to Hazel by way of Keehaw, of course, and his attitude is that no news is good news. Hazel has never met Avons, who led the founding party for effort of Vlef Lane, but Groundsell regards him highly. Numbers at Watership Down are now about right, with some more rabbits expressing interest on going to the new warren. Bigwig asks Keehaw to show them the way. Sometime later, as spring turns to summer, Buckthorn shows up as a Vlef Lane emissary and conveys that Hazel is apparently needed at the warren. At first, we're not quite sure what this is about, but it turns out to be a joint leadership meeting, also involving Captain Campion, as Buckthorn describes him. This sounds a bit problematic to Hazel. This encourages Hazel to set off sooner rather than waiting a few days. He plans to take Fiver with him. Keehaw will fly overhead, much like when the Watership Down rabbits travelled in large groups to Ephrata. Upon arrival at Vlef Lane, Groundsell is very happy to see Hazel and Fiver. It is interesting to wonder how Groundsell was impacted by his time at Watership Down after having been an Ephrafan. Hazel and Fiver stay with Groundsell as his guest. An offer Hazel also made to Buckthorn after he arrived at Watership. For good or ill, that's something that neither the Freya-Rot or Woundwort would ever have offered. Groundsell also wonders if Sandwort might want to join his warren, but Fiver makes it clear he is far from recovered from his ordeal and couldn't make the journey yet. Campion arrives the next day, and we see that Groundsel is addressed with the Ra after his name by his own rabbits. Groundsel even corrects one of his own rabbits for not applying the correct title of Ra to Campion's name. His title of Captain originates with the old Efratha, a place many rabbits will want to forget about. However, the young rabbit makes it clear that many of them still refer to him that way. Possibly those who are too young to remember Woundwort? As they all come together, Hazel and Campion's meeting seems to be equally awkward for both of them. Neither of them have forgotten that Campion asked Woundwort if he should kill Hazel when he tried making a peace offering before the Battle of Watership Down. Strawberry's entrance into the scene helps everyone get past this moment. We all remember that along with Buckthorn, Strawberry is an advisor to Groundsel, and we must guess his place at Left Lane is now similar to the relationship between Hazel and Fiver, Bigwig and Blackberry. He is also, of course, another rabbit who once intended Hazel and his companions harm by failing to warn them of the snares at Cowslip's Warren, but his rehabilitation is now long complete. You get the sense that Campion's is not. Not yet. The meeting begins. It starts off with Groundsel being respectful but a bit accusatory towards Campion. He accuses Campion of having visited Left Lane a number of times, which he agrees with. In fact, Campion has been conducting wide patrols, but with Left Lane rabbits. While this is an interesting thing for Campion to have continued doing, it does have potential to undermine Groundsel's authority. Hazel knows that one strength of Campion's character is that he will be straightforward in explaining himself. He does not disappoint. Campion explains that he can no longer get Efrathans to go out on wide patrol, naturally because it's associated with Woundwort. Although, as we readers know, wide patrols are one of the best ideas that Woundwort ever had, at least from a reconnaissance perspective. Nevertheless, one of their more controversial purposes was to improve the ability of the Efrathan Owsla to track and capture escapees from Efratha, and Campion, it cannot be avoided stating, was in charge of doing exactly that. Campion's running wide patrols out of Left Lane becomes the point of contention that it should be. Groundsel feels that Campion is trying to Woundwartize Left Lane. Campion states this is not the case, and that he only takes rabbits who want to go, and that he never even mentions Woundwort. For my enjoyment and their good, as he puts it. This is all very well, but we're still looking at the situation where a chief rabbit is exerting his influence on rabbits from another warren. Looking at this from a Hazel perspective, we know him enough to understand this is something that he would never do. Hazel would see this as an impertinence, and a big one at that. There is real tension between Groundsel and Campion, with Groundsel even accusing him of wanting to take over of Left Lane. Fiver asks Campion to expand on his phrase, "for my enjoyment and their good." After a pause, this leads to Campion giving us a real insight into his character. He is openly proud of many aspects of his previous life as Captain Campion, and not afraid to admit it. The old Efratha is what made him what he is, and though he does not defend the worst excesses of Woundwort, he clearly realises that he has him to thank for that. Leading the remnants of the Great Patrol back to Efratha after their defeat at the Battle of Watership Down had been the hardest thing he had ever done. When he got back, he was half expecting to be killed by Efrathans who had hated the general, but instead they made him Chief Rabbit. They needed him. His first job had been to dismantle all the worst aspects of Woundwort's regime and to decide what to keep. The wide patrols were an obvious example of the latter. Woundwort had always said that rabbits did not have to be passive victims of the Allil. They could beat them. And the wide patrols were an essential part of that, building self-reliance and confidence as well as essential skills in any rabbit wanting to confront or evade the Allil. Hazel points out that rabbits get killed on wide patrols from time to time. Campion acknowledges this, but is shockingly honest by saying it is no more than they can afford to lose. A rare example of the commodification of bucks rather than does in the written world of Watership Down. However, Campion had been unable to persuade any Efrathans to go on wide patrol and realised that pushing the issue could have been dangerous for him. And so he had come to Left Lane to see if he could interest anyone there. There had been an enthusiastic response, and all those he had taken out had been the better for it. Well, except for those who didn't make it back. Hazel presses the matter of deaths on wide patrol. Campion acknowledges there have been a few, but not a lot. At this point, Groundsel says bad-temperedly that he should have asked him first. And now we get a flash of the old Campion, as he tells Groundsel not to speak to him like that, and that he did not want to ask for favours from a junior officer. Groundsel reminds him that he is a chief rabbit now, just like Campion. Fiver, very wisely, proposes that they should take a break. Both he and Hazel go off together to talk and enjoy a few dandelions, which grow better here than on the down. When the meeting reconvenes, Hazel wisely addresses Campion with the Ra extension. Hazel and Fiver have come up with one of those solutions that they are famous for. Hazel asks Campion to come and stay at Watership Down for a while, where he's certain he'll be able to train their rabbits on wide patrols. Hazel also says that Bigwig will be glad to see him again, having often spoken of him in admiring terms. This is ingenious, and is up there with Hazel's suggestion of Left Lane before it even had a name to Woundwort, and even the idea of leaving Sandalford after the Freya dismissed the idea of a Warren move. He also adds that he is sure someone else could be found to run Efrafa in his absence, and that Kihar could provide rapid communication if anything were to go wrong there. Could Avens be a good candidate for this role? The question is explored no further. This suggestion has the intended effect on both Campion and Groundsel. It's also a brilliant idea when you think of wide patrols as a transferable skill set. Hazel and Fiver have really thought this through. A proposed solution with some ego salve built in. Campion is not against the idea, and as it's discussed, he and Groundsel more or less come to even ground again. Campion is also looking forward to meeting Bigwig again, but this time as a friend. The Watership group, including 2 young rabbits from Left Lane who begged to be allowed to go with Campion, patrol their way back to Watership Down, where they surprise Heisensley upon their arrival. Campion and his Left Lane followers stay in what was Firesparrow as he begins some short wide patrol training. Bigwig goes along on a longer patrol, and remarks later to Hazel and Fiver that he assesses Campion's leadership being better than his own. Eventually, a doe is lost on wide patrol. Upon the loss, Hazel is upset, but Bigwig takes a very Campion-like point of view in that some losses are a price worth paying, considering the skills being developed in those who take part. Getting trained and going on a wide patrol became a coming-of-age thing within Watership Down, a thing to strive for and to gain respect from. It seems that the skill was truly transferred to the Watership Down Warren, and Campion stays on at Watership Down, becoming an established institution there. Campion is admired for never denigrating younger rabbits who are learning to wide patrol. He is full of praise for them, saying, however, that it is the Allil who will show them how good they are, not him. One rainy afternoon, the following April, Campion is killed on a wide patrol beyond the town of Kingsclear, when they encounter a pair of cats. Although the 5 rabbits on the patrol see the cats off, Campion is mortally wounded and dies where he fell. It is how he would have wanted his life to end, on wide patrol. And so, poignantly, we have reached the end of Tales from Watership Down. Richard Adams' last ever paragraph written about his world of talking rabbits on Watership Down was, quote, "He too, like Woundwort, in time became a legend. On dark, rainy evenings, if a benighted patrol became lost and uncertain, a spirit of confidence would enter the leader's heart and guide them home. This they knew to be Captain Campion, one-time hero of Efrafa, but no less a hero to the rabbits of Watership Down." Is it canon? Just a bit. I think this chapter is just about the most faithful to the original book in the whole of Tales from Watership Down, and as such it is very much canon, and its redemption of Campion is both moving and appropriate to the kind of Warren that Hazel Ra wanted to lead. Leea Mäkelä adds, quote, "I seem to have accepted the story of Campion so much as canon on previous readings, I was willing to send Bigwig to Wide Patrol already before the story where Wide Patrols get established. Well, it is a story around a character that already existed in the original novel, and not in contradiction with what has been told of him before. I had to recheck the end of Watership Down, and it says Groundsel didn't force his rabbits in Belt Warren to wide patrol, but rarely, so that might be a small discontinuity. In Tales we learn not only that Belt's Warren was called Left Lane in Lay Plain, but also that Groundsel was against wide patrols and didn't have to force rabbits to join them, as the one who arranged them was Campion, who specifically came from Efrafa to do it, and joining them was voluntary. In the story, Campion, who had been Efrafa's chief for a while, moves to Watership to keep on wide patrolling, and meets his end on a patrol while living there. We are told no more about Efrafa, and suddenly I'm curious about how was Efrafa rearranged after Woundwort, and who did they choose as their chief rabbit after Campion decided to leave. Campion's wide patrols bring a bit more military element to the story and serve also as a vent for those more military-oriented rabbits like Bigwig, who in tales seem to have difficulties adjusting to life in peace. Like a peacetime military, wide patrols were described to teach rabbits survival skills in less familiar environments, and basically the reader can imagine that a rabbit who has trained and honed their skills on wide patrols would be better off in case they have to, or decide to leave their own warren and travel further to find a place for a new one. Placing the story of Campion as the last one in Tales suggests that the adventures go on, even if we are not told more tales of them." End quote. Thank you, Leah. And isn't it frustrating not to have more directly from Richard Adams written about this world? To never have, for example, his account of Campion's arrival back at Ephrafa after the Battle of Watership Down, or of how the co-chiefdom of Hazel and Hysensley developed over time. Poignantly, the last words Richard Adams ever wrote spoken by Hazel were in reply to Bigwig saying that the loss of an occasional rabbit is a price worth paying for the benefits of wide patrols. When he says that their rabbits are no different from any other rabbits, Hazel replies, "Oh yes, they are. They're different when you know them personally." Chronologically, the next words spoken by Hazel, in Richard Adams' words, are addressed to El Ahrar himself as he visits the elderly Hazel in the epilogue of Watership Down to invite him to join his Owsla. Words written 24 years earlier, in the novel that began it all. Next time, we look back over Tale from Watership Down, and then look forward to where this podcast goes from here.